Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet, and today, strange ways for podcasts to end. I was recording Stone Ape last week when all of a sudden the line went dead. Well, it didn't go dead, actually. I could hear breathing sounds and these kind of things. And as this podcast is put out, the community's already had a chance to listen and gauge what went on. But to actually be doing that live, to actually be in that environment with that cognizant space, I reflected on the way in which podcasts have ended. There have been some circumstances. There was a relatively famous skeptic podcast where one of the hosts suffered a stroke and basically was unconscious for about a year. One of the more curious examples. There have been a few podcasts where the hosts have passed away. There have been a number of podcasts where the hosts have just decided enough was enough. But one of my favourite stories was associated with a podcast which I think still exists but not in the original form, called 40K Radio. 40K Radio came out of nowhere and immediately started a very heavy-pitched, you've got to become a member to this podcast to get additional content, and we have like a forum set up, but you need to pay money in order to get into the forum. And this started to define wargaming podcasts, and there were a number of other affiliates that started these wargaming podcasts where you had to join various sections to get additional content and all this other kinds of stuff. And it always struck me as relatively strange that these things were functioning entities, but my suspicion is that when you're dealing with a hobby where you're typically putting down like $200 a month into your hobby, skimming off a little bit more of that hobby dollar for a podcast is probably relatively easy. 40K Radio was unfortunately far too successful for its own good. I think within the first couple of years they had, I don't know, probably 2,000 to 4,000 folk plopping down $10 a month to, get access to this additional content. After this went on for a couple of years, the IRS got involved. And quite extraordinary what really occurred towards the end before it was sold. Because obviously 40K Radio was just an amazing franchise for wargaming enthusiasts. The accounts associated with the IRS Inquisition with 40K Radio, unfortunately, are not in the forefront of my mind anymore, but at the time, they were absolutely tantalizing. I've never charged a penny for podcasts, and the 40K Radio narrative, what happened to the hosts, the co-hosts, and just the whole IRS investigation of this lucrative podcast, chilling stuff. It ultimately, I think, broke up a marriage and did a variety of other things, and the guy avoided a prison sentence, but basically, I mean, if you're getting $40,000 a month from a podcast for a period of about 2 years, and you're not paying taxes on that money, the IRS creates radar systems to track people like that. In any case, of my podcast listenings in the past, certainly one of the more amusing accounts of what can go terribly wrong in the field of podcasting. But you have to anticipate, podcasts come, podcasts go. It's a relatively ethereal form with a few folks that kind of hang on for bitter life. But just remember, cherish them while they're here. I have a number of podcasts that disappeared that I can't get their audio anymore that I just used to love to listen to. A bunch of podcasts in the Midwest and just a bunch of guys getting together and all this kind of stuff. And funnily enough, I think probably the capitalist element of these kind of environments, the fact that you can't really have a hobby that appears to be relatively successful, that you're not making money on after a certain period of time, ultimately rob those podcasts of being continuous run podcasts. And there was all this kind of strange, well, we've got to up the listeners, and then we've got to get more money in, and then we've got to charge more subscription, and then when the subscription fails the first time, let's try subscription again. How about subscription a third time? Yes. Sadly, these podcasts no longer exist. Sadly, their audio is no longer retained. But as you listen to podcasts, as you think about these things, enjoy them while they're there. Get the most out of them. Participate wherever possible. Because podcasts are ethereal. They're like radio. It just disappears in the ether. You might download stuff. My favourite thing is to meet Model Rail Radio fans that have every single episode catalogued. Then they have their own tagging system to put in where, if they want to follow a particular podcast on a particular idea or people or this kind of stuff. But yeah, in general, people just listen to them and lose them. Just through the fingers. So cherish the podcast while you have them. Cherish the podcast host while you have them. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.